Okay, so now we're on station 3. There was actually a misprint on station 3, and I caught it before you guys came into class. I tried to fix it, but you may not have noticed it. On that microslide viewer, you were looking at 7, and that's why it was important for you to look at the back side at the picture image, right? So this idea was looking at that plants are multicellular eukaryotes, and this gave 2 examples of plants because, as you know, plants can make their own food. They're called autotrophs. That's the word for producers in middle school. And plants have specialized parts, right? So some parts of a plant go through photosynthesis and make their own food, and some parts of a plant don't. So this was kind of a good example of the root part of a cell, which is, you're familiar with an onion. An onion is actually the root of an onion plant, and the leaf part of a different type of a plant called an elodea. Elodea are good examples because they have thin leaf tissue, so it's easy to see the individualized cells. Sometimes if you put like the leaf of a tree or something, it's so thick it's hard to see those individualized cells. So this was a good example of the onion. You can see the nucleus pretty well and all this cytoplasm. But the elodea I thought was not a great example, so that's why I provided this picture for you here, just to kind of give you that color and so that you could nicely see the chloroplast. This is the actual color of chloroplast. They didn't dye this. They dyed this onion here purple. They're kind of just a naturally kind of a yellowish brown looking cell, but this one is green because of the chloroplast, and these are all little chloroplasts. That's where photosynthesis happens, and how they make their own food. However, in this one you couldn't see a nucleus very well, but in this one you could. I think this cell had a nucleus identified right there. So you should have labeled a nucleus in both of the different types of plant cells and understood that, you know, even though they're different types of cells, they're both eukaryotic. You can see that you've got these nuclei visible, and that they're multicellular. You can see that you have these sheets of tissue of cells working together. So obviously we're not looking at the entire onion or the entire elodea leaf in this picture. This was an image that I thought a student did well on here. So the nucleus was clearly labeled in both of those pictures. There was green color added for the elodea, and there was a brown color for the onion. Why does the elodea have chloroplasts and the onion not? Because chloroplasts are for photosynthesis. We kind of covered that already. And then what is cytoplasm? That's just the fluid between organelles. It's important. It's not just something that organelles float in. And it is the reason why when somebody says that we're 99% water, it's because all the space between each one of our individual cells is filled with cytoplasm, which is mostly water. So let's look at the final station. And that is station 4 that you circulated through. So this was looking again at that comparative size between a eukaryote and a prokaryote, but this was actually kind of highlighting that symbiotic relationship that we have with these bacteria, right? So you had an image of a cheek cell. Right, so these were several cheek cells and cheek tissue kind of squished together like multicellular organisms have. And you could clearly see the nucleus in each of these, in several of them. This one was kind of hard to see. But what I thought was really interesting from this slide was that you could also see some little tiny dots. And those little tiny dots are bacteria. So it gives you this really great size comparison. And our cheek cells are kind of small by comparison to some of our other cells that make up our body. But still, you could fit several hundred bacteria on just that one surface layer of a cheek cell there. So you could see that eukaryote is quite a bit larger than the prokaryote, the bacteria. So this was an example of an image that I thought was really well done, a drawing. So we had the several cheek cells together. Then they put an N inside of each nucleus, which I thought was really cool. And then went ahead and I asked them to label nucleus so we knew that N was that. And then they drew the little dots and circled some of the bacteria cells on this cheek cell. They appropriately read the information card. So remember that the each information card told you what the magnification was. So if you didn't record that, you can go back and look at these information cards to get that information there. So those were the things that I really wanted you to look at, like understand that big size difference between prokaryotic cells with no nucleus. I mean, you can tell in every single one of these eukaryotes, the nucleus itself is way bigger than any bacteria, than any prokaryote. So clearly they're just not sophisticated organisms or large enough organisms to contain a nucleus. But also to look at this difference between some organisms are actually unicellular, that are eukaryotic, but most eukaryotes are going to be multicellular and have these tissues of cell types working together. Your final station was an interactive, and you just needed to click here and make sure that you read this information in order to answer the questions. So this link right here would have taken you to the interactive. I'll go there for a quick second. And what you were doing was just zooming in here to a specific spot. So you can see as we zoom in, you know, you go to smaller cells, you finally can see that bacteria is smaller even than a chromosome. This is just one section of DNA. And these little dots down here are viruses, which are not living things, they're not cells. They don't have all the parts, and they can't go through all the functions that cells can. If I zoom out just a little bit, I can see the edge of my skin cell and still make out the size of some of these, this bacteria right here. So you can see that that's one of the biggest bacteria that there are compared to one of our smallest cells. So our red blood cells are a little smaller than skin cells, but quite a bit bigger than those prokaryotes. So this is an interesting kind of fun little interactive. There's our amoeba and our paramecium that we were looking at, right? In our lab as well. So it's kind of a cool interactive that you can go through and look at. Then the questions on the slide here are on the handout are designed to kind of help you to think about some of the more important quiz portions. And then this bonus right here, how many kingdoms did you observe today, is kind of previewing the last part of our unit, because we're looking at different kingdoms that different organisms fall into. And if you look at the information cards, you'll notice that the kingdom is identified right there. So you can go through and count those to see if you can get figure out how many kingdoms we talked about. So I hope that's helpful. Double check your lab, make sure you have everything in order so that you're ready to go tomorrow.